My neighbor tried to steal my home, claiming it was hers. After I spent years renovating, but her lies backfired and left her paying over $200,000. Before we get started, let me introduce the main characters. The entitled neighbor will be referred to as N from here on out, and her spoiled son will be known as S, or entitled son. There's also the previous owner of our house, whom we'll call P.O. While P.O. plays only a small role in this story, their presence is still important. Also keep in mind that from the time we bought the house to the present day, nearly 15 years have passed. So unless stated otherwise, you can assume there were significant time gaps between most events described here. Let's begin. To really understand how everything escalated, I need to give you some background. Most of what I'm about to share happened before we purchased and moved into the house, and owned a huge piece of property located down the road from a well-known recreational lake in our area. When I say down the road, I mean it's quite a distance away, yet still on the only road that leads to several lakefront homes, resorts, and the busiest boat dock on this side of the lake. The properties around here aren't so valuable that average folks can't buy them, but there are a few high-dollar homes further down the road with wealthy owners driving by frequently. This will become important later. Karen, N, is fairly wealthy. She ended up dividing her land into 4 roughly equal portions when her kids became adults. She gave one portion to her daughter, who surprisingly turned out to be a decent human being despite the rest of her family. Another portion she handed over to S, her son. She even built homes on both properties tailored to each of her kids' preferences. Then, on the 4th piece, the one without a home, she built a small convenience store. That detail also becomes relevant down the line. Now, I'm not entirely sure why, but possibly to avoid future legal drama, Karen transferred the property deeds directly to her children. You probably see where this is heading. While her daughter turned out to be responsible, S, or maybe I should start calling him irresponsible son, was the neighborhood nightmare. He partied nonstop. Loud, wild, late-night blowouts became a regular thing. The neighbors couldn't stand him. The police were called so often they practically had someone parked nearby in advance. To make matters worse, his mother paid all the household bills for him. Everything, electric, water, trash, went to her address and was under her name. Well, everything except one. Since the property deed was in S's name, the property taxes were his responsibility. But instead of paying them or forwarding the bills to Karen, he just ignored them altogether. I'm guessing she either forgot about it or assumed he was taking care of it. Either way, it wasn't shocking when the police eventually showed up at his house, but it was surprising when he didn't return and the house went up for auction. At that point, the home was trashed. There were holes in the drywall, a massive hole in the living room floor that led down into the garage basement, and the kitchen and subfloor had to be completely replaced. Mud was smeared across nearly every wall. His constant partying and utter negligence had turned the place into what the bank officially deemed unlivable. Because of that status, the only buyers were people who could pay cash up front. That's when P.O. entered the picture. He wasn't one of those flashy house flippers you see on TV. He was more of a hobbyist, a retired guy who flipped homes to stay busy. P.O. would buy houses like this one dirt cheap at auction, fix them up himself, and then resell them. While working on one house, he lived off the profit from the previous flip. By the time he finished a renovation and bought a new project, that leftover money would usually be gone. Whatever remained went into a small emergency fund he didn't think was particularly important. At the same time, we were searching for a new home. We couldn't afford anything pricey, but when we spotted this listing online, it seemed like a dream come true. Right size, perfect neighborhood, and best of all, it was just down the road from the lake where we loved to fish and take the boat out. It was basically perfect, or at least it looked that way at first. We were nervous about the asking price, especially since it wasn't even officially listed yet, but we figured it couldn't hurt to drive by and check it out anyway. We drove by and saw P.O. working on the house. We stopped to say hello and asked about the price. He told us he was in the middle of fixing it up and that his realtor had just added it to the website database for convenience. It wasn't actually up for sale yet. Still, we sat and had a nice friendly chat with him. He seemed to appreciate the company. We told him we'd be interested in buying the house at a fair price, considering both its current condition and the work he'd already put into it. He was about halfway done with the renovations. We explained how much we loved the place and how we saw it as our forever home, but he politely declined, saying he already had multiple offers and didn't feel right selling it until the work was complete. He told us we could buy it at full price once it was finished. We thanked him, left our number, and asked him to call if he ever changed his mind. He promised he would. Less than 2 weeks later, we got a surprise call from him. His sister had fallen seriously ill in another state, and he wanted to go be with her. He said he wouldn't have the time or energy to finish the house. He admitted the house wasn't up to code yet, but if we could find a way to buy it, he'd be happy to sell it to us at a fair price. We were thrilled and immediately started looking for banks. A realtor friend of ours connected us with a lender who agreed to finance the house, but with a condition. We had just 2 weeks to bring it up to code. If we failed, the loan would default, and the bank could repossess and auction the home. When we told P.O., he offered to help however he could. He didn't have time to work on it himself, but he walked us through exactly what needed to be done to meet the minimum code requirements, how much time, effort, and money it would take. Then he went a step further. We took out a loan for twice the price he was asking, and he gave us the extra half back to fund the necessary repairs. Thanks to the work P.O. had already completed, the house was nearly up to code. We probably could have done the rest ourselves, but to be safe, we called in a few friends and finished the work in half the time. Once the house met code, we were finally approved. There was still a ton of work to do, replacing floors and subflooring, rewiring, patching up holes in the walls, and tearing down the awful, decomposing wallpaper that had been glued directly to the drywall. You get the idea. We poured ourselves into the renovation, and then, at long last, we were ready to move into our dream home. Sure, there were still a few things to fix, but we were ready. We hadn't even finished unloading the moving truck when N came over to introduce herself. During our rushed dealings with P.O., he had repeatedly warned us about N and her entitled attitude. But when she first showed up, she was sweet and polite. We honestly couldn't figure out why P.O. had been so concerned. Then it happened. As we were wrapping up our conversation, she casually, almost sympathetically, told us that the house we had just moved into actually belonged to her, and that we had 30 days to leave. She said she felt bad for us because we'd clearly been scammed. But according to her, the house was hers, and P.O. had no legal right to sell it. We'd heard nightmare stories about home scams before, so you can imagine our panic. We were horrified. After all the time, money, and effort we'd poured into this house, we thought we were about to lose it all because we'd fallen for a fraud. We kept our cool, thanked her for being so polite while explaining everything, and told her we'd speak with the bank and P.O. to clear things up. So that's exactly what we did. We contacted the bank first, and they confirmed that P.O. was indeed the rightful owner of the deed. When we followed up with the realtor, they backed that up without hesitation. When we spoke to P.O., he told us this wasn't the first time he'd been accused by Anne and her family. Apparently, they had harassed him multiple times since he bought the property at auction, repeatedly claiming he'd stolen the house from them. Everyone we talked to had the same story. We even went to the courthouse ourselves and confirmed that the deed was in our name. It was during all of this that we started hearing the full backstory about S from several neighbors. Not long after, N came by again and asked us when she could expect us to be moved out. We explained very clearly that we weren't going anywhere. We legally owned the home. We told her it wasn't our fault her son had lost the property and expressed sympathy for her situation. We said we understood it must have been painful to lose something so meaningful due to her son's irresponsibility, but we couldn't just give up a home we'd bought with our hard-earned money and worked so hard to restore. Realizing we understood the truth, she launched into an emotional story about how the property had been in her family for generations. She claimed P.O. had taken advantage of them during a time of distress when her son had been arrested, and that he'd somehow stolen the house during all the chaos. We asked her why they hadn't just bid on it at auction if it meant that much to them. After all, we'd only paid P.O. around $50,000 for it, and that was after he'd already made some profit. Despite all the work and materials he had poured into it, it had been practically a steal, and said they refused to pay for something that was rightfully theirs. She believed it had been taken from them unfairly and thought paying money to get it back would validate the theft. Once again, we told her we were sorry, but we weren't going to take a loss on a property we'd invested so much time, money, and effort into. Still, we tried to be understanding. We offered to sell it to her for $100,000, well below its market value considering the location and how much we had fixed it up. We didn't say it out loud, but we would have gone down to $90,000 if she'd been open to negotiating. Instead, she immediately countered with $40,000, insisting she shouldn't have to pay anything at all for something that belonged to her. When we said her offer was way too low, she tried to justify it by saying she'd be generous and throw in an extra $10,000 to cover the repairs and upgrades we'd done. That was it for us. When we mentioned that we'd originally paid PO $50,000, she blew up, called us liars, said we were thieves, and claimed the house had been a total dump that couldn't possibly be worth that much. She didn't just resort to name-calling, she went as far as calling our dream home a dump. This place we had poured months of hard labor and tens of thousands of dollars into, that we had built up from wreckage. We were done with her nonsense. We politely told her to leave and made it clear she was no longer welcome on our property. We said we wouldn't sell the house to her even if she offered double its market value. That obviously made her furious. She hurled insults as she stormed out. Later, we found out she was spreading rumors all over the neighborhood, telling people we had stolen the house from her and other ridiculous lies. At first, we ignored it, assuming no one would believe her. Then one day, a man we'd never met pulled into our driveway with a gun. He yelled at us to get out. We were shocked, but we'd heard of him before. He had a reputation in the area. Apparently, he thought of himself as the peacekeeper of the neighborhood. He was known for confronting anyone who caused trouble. Most people in this rural area actually respected him and said he was a decent guy. In a place where a lot of people didn't exactly follow the law, his presence was appreciated. He genuinely worked hard to keep the peace. And, to be honest, did more than the actual police ever did, most of the time anyway. Just a side note, our neighborhood is basically split into two main sections. One is made up mostly of older, retired folks. It's quiet, peaceful, and everyone generally gets along. The other section is further out into the woods, more isolated, and let's just say, less law-abiding. We live right at the edge of the peaceful part, with about a mile or so of woodland and farmland separating us from the rougher side. So when we heard about this peacekeeper guy, and given the way he was described, we figured the man who showed up with the gun was probably him. We decided to test that theory. We told him we weren't sure what was going on, and invited him in for a beer and a chat. We told him he was welcome to bring his firearm, but that we'd be bringing ours too. That's just how things work in our town. Just about everyone owns a gun. Honestly, there are more gun stores than dollar stores around here. It's not unusual. It's just a way of saying, I can handle myself if things go sideways. Now, if someone points a gun at you, that's a different story. But he didn't. Back to the story. He accepted our invitation, and after a couple of hours of talking things through and explaining what really happened, he apologized. He said he got caught up in the rumors and overreacted. It wouldn't happen again, he assured us. Then he actually thanked us for buying the place. When S had lived there, he said, the whole neighborhood was miserable. People were always complaining about loud music, drunken teenagers stumbling down the road in the middle of the night, nearly getting hit by cars. We all laughed about it, and he left without another word. Now here's why the peacekeeper had believed those rumors in the first place. This is a bit of a side story, but it's also a major turning point, and the beginning of N's downward spiral. Some of this overlaps with what comes next, but let's dive in. Remember how I said N divided her land into 4 parts, and one of those parts was used to build a convenience store. That store became hugely popular in the neighborhood. It was in a prime location, right in the middle of everything. But let me be clear, it wasn't popular because of great prices. They actually overcharged for almost everything, and it wasn't because of the customer service either. Most of the time, the best you'd get was a half-hearted thanks as you walked out. Occasionally, they'd refund you if you found mold on your food. So I guess that counts as decent service? Regardless, the store stayed packed because it was the only one for miles. If you needed basic groceries and didn't feel like making the long trip into town, it was just a short walk or drive for most locals. Even we, despite everything, put our issues aside and shopped there now and then. I mean, they were literally next door. That small store helped Ann and her family build up a glowing reputation in the neighborhood. People loved the convenience and were fiercely protective of it. No one wanted anything to jeopardize their precious local shop. And back then, everyone still thought Ann and her family were good people. So when she started spreading rumors about us, people listened. Now the rumor that we had stolen an entire house from her? That one kind of fizzled out. Most folks knew how absurd that sounded. But the other, smaller rumors, those stuck around. They were mostly petty nonsense, and we didn't care much about them. Let's be honest, even if you believed every bad thing N said about us, there were neighbors with way worse skeletons in their closets. But because people didn't want to get on N's bad side and risk being banned from her store, they just avoided us. We weren't exactly outcasts, but we weren't included either. Everyone just sort of left us alone. Then, after a few years, S finally got out of prison. With nowhere else to go, N let him come back. She didn't want him living in her house again, though, so she rented him the apartment above her convenience store. She was very clear. No more wild parties. Ever. Not on her property. And surprisingly, he didn't actually have to hear from various neighbors who had noticed the overcharging and used them as evidence. He showed everyone the pattern, itemized totals that didn't match what people had actually bought, with some items being charged twice or even 3 times. He was thorough, loud, and made sure no one could deny it anymore. But let's rewind a bit before that moment of satisfaction. S didn't have to pay rent. He was simply asked to run the store when N and the others were too busy, which honestly wasn't very often. But even after everything that had happened, after jail, after losing the house, S still hadn't learned a single thing. While running the register, he'd often double-charge customers and quietly pocket the difference. We caught this ourselves a few times. We'd go back to get a refund, and every time, they'd brush it off, saying the register was malfunctioning. After noticing a clear pattern, we brought it up directly with N. We told her calmly that her son seemed to be scamming customers and likely pocketing the extra cash. Despite her entitled nature, even we thought she wouldn't stoop to something so blatantly illegal. We genuinely liked the store. It was convenient, and didn't want to see anything bad happen to it. But instead of thanking us for looking out, she brushed it off and, in the nicest way possible, told us to screw off. So we did, but we also shared what we discovered with a few of our neighbors. It had taken us years to get even a small amount of trust back in the community, thanks to N's earlier rumor campaign. But we'd finally built a few real friendships. Things like delivering Christmas treats to the neighbors each year helped build those bonds. They appreciated us telling them, even though most of them admitted they didn't fully believe it. Still, word got around fast, and then Mr. Peacekeeper showed up again. This time he was much friendlier. By now, he knew most of the rumors about us were nonsense. We'd had several casual chats with him over the past couple of years. He'd swing by for a beer now and then, talk about local issues, and ask our opinion on small things going on in the area. He made a point to speak to almost everyone in the neighborhood at least once a year, just to make sure everything stayed peaceful. He didn't trust the police and wanted to handle things better than they did, and honestly, we all appreciated that. But he didn't like the rumors we were now spreading, especially about N and her little shop. He told us flat out that he had already spoken to them, and they claimed it was all just a misunderstanding due to a faulty register. He warned us that if we didn't stop spreading those rumors, we'd have a real problem. We considered showing him proof, but deep down, we knew it wouldn't matter. He liked N and trusted her far more than he trusted us. So we apologized and explained that we only wanted to protect the few people in the neighborhood who trusted us. He accepted that, gave us a final warning, and left. From that point on, we decided we wouldn't shop there unless we absolutely had no other choice. But everything started to change after a few more years passed. Even though Mr. Peacekeeper told everyone our claims were false and rooted in a property feud, people started paying more attention to their receipts after shopping there. Eventually, they began noticing the same shady overcharging patterns we had. She had probably pocketed a ridiculous amount of money by then. And N? She definitely knew, but instead of putting a stop to it, she kept trying to silence people with more rumors and denial. The problem with running a small country store is that it depends entirely on local regulars. In the warmer months, sure, they got vacation traffic and made a healthy profit. But that alone wasn't enough to carry them through the winter. Then came the turning point. Mr. Peacekeeper finally put 2 and 2 together, and when he did, he exploded. We could hear him from next door, just screaming at us, ripping into him face to face, and even yelling at N for enabling it. It was glorious. But he didn't stop there. That same day, he went door to door across the neighborhood, telling every single person exactly what S and N had been doing. He even brought a stack of receipts gathered from other residents as proof, making sure nobody could deny it anymore. The fallout from that confrontation only deepened our ongoing feud with her, and honestly, it's been exhausting. But let me back up just a bit so you can appreciate how things completely unraveled for her. So after Mr. Peacekeeper went door to door, receipts in hand, showing everyone what S had been up to, it was game over for their little store. If there was one person in the neighborhood more trusted than N, it was Mr. Peacekeeper. In less than 24 hours, their entire business collapsed. Everyone in the neighborhood stopped going there. Sure, they still managed to scrape by during the summer thanks to out-of-towners and winter birds who didn't know any better, but once winter came and the tourists disappeared, the money dried up. After 2 winters, they were forced to shut down for the colder months entirely. That meant they had to throw away over 90% of their stock each fall and restock again in the spring. Not surprisingly, that turned out to be financially unsustainable. After about 3 more years, they shut the store down permanently. That's when their reputation finally started to tank. And when it did, the neighborhood's attitude toward us changed drastically. People began to show us actual respect. We no longer had to go out of our way just to earn a little friendliness. People stopped treating us like we were cursed or something. We made friends easily, and N's power over the community crumbled. But that was only the beginning of her downfall. To get to the climax, I have to lay out a bit more background. Sorry if this is starting to feel like a full-blown novel, but I promise it's worth it. One major thing to know about N: she is ridiculously, obsessively nosy. We can't even step outside without her peering at us through her windows or making up an excuse to wander outside, walking her dog, picking up non-existent trash, pulling weeds, whatever she can think of just to spy. You can bet that if we were outside, she was too. We have nothing to hide, obviously. But we're not on great terms with her, and being watched every second is just uncomfortable. We had plans to set up a small pool and hot tub in our backyard, and the last thing we wanted was someone watching us relax in bathing suits. So we started looking into building a privacy fence, trying to be courteous. We went to inform N that we were planning to put up a fence. Predictably, she flat out rejected the idea. We told her politely but firmly that we were doing it anyway, but we still wanted to be respectful, so we offered to discuss the design, color, and layout with her. We figured since she spends so much time staring at our property, she might appreciate having some input on what she'd be looking at. Yes, even after everything she put us through, we were still trying to be good neighbors. To avoid any disputes about property lines, we decided to place the fence 1 full foot inside our own property, all the way along the border. Just to be sure, we went down to the courthouse and paid for an official copy of the deed and the property map. This was before S had gotten out of jail. We were stunned to discover that about a third of our land was being claimed by N. She had a small shed on it, and even a garden. The thing is, our property isn't shaped like a neat square. It's more like a lopsided hexagon or trapezoid. Odd-shaped lots are really common around here. A line of trees runs diagonally across one part of the land, forming a natural but misleading boundary. According to the official deed and map, a triangle-shaped section of land that looks like it belongs to her is actually ours. The trees just made it seem like a separate lot, so when we brought this up to N, she absolutely lost it. She called us liars, thieves, and a dozen other insults. But we genuinely didn't care all that much. We'd lived here for years, thinking that part of the land was hers, so we were willing to make things easier. We offered to sell the section to her, or even trade it for a small corner of her property that connected to ours, a wisey spot that was awkward for her to maintain and would be much more useful to us. It would have been a win-win, but she flatly refused, said she'd never pay for land that already belonged to her, and that she'd never give us anything, especially since, in her mind, we had already stolen everything from her, and ever since then, the property line issue has snowballed into a massive ongoing dispute. But before I get to the event that finally brought everything to a head, let me give you one last piece of context to make it all clear. As I mentioned earlier, we live in a very rural area where property lines are often messy, to say the least. Many of the deeds here are over 100 years old, and instead of using modern measurements, like X feet north, they use vague, outdated markers like from the large oak tree to the rock beside the stream. The issue is, those landmarks either no longer exist or could apply to multiple things, which makes disputes not only common but extremely complicated because of how confusing and valuable even a small strip of land can be in certain cases. Our state has implemented strict laws to prevent corruption and protect property rights. Just a few years back, for example, a private landowner actually won a lawsuit against a huge corporation over just 0.1 acres, and that win earned him over $1 million in damages. Back to our situation. While property disputes are generally chaotic here, ours shouldn't have been. N had split up the land herself not long ago, so our deed and property lines were fairly straightforward. But even that didn't stop problems, because surveyors here are held to such intense legal standards that they avoid any job that smells like a dispute. Let me explain why. In our state, if a surveyor makes even a minor error, just a few feet, they can be fined heavily and permanently lose their license. On top of that, they're required to notify and refund all their clients from up to 10 years prior, and those clients can then request new, non-affiliated surveys at the original surveyor's expense. They can even sue for damages and unpaid rent if any of the missurveyed land was misused or left out. Now, if a surveyor is found to have been bribed or blackmailed, it's even worse. All financial and legal liability transfers to the person who influenced them. And just the process of going through all that, court fees, time, reputation loss, is enough to keep most surveyors far away from anything involving a property argument. So when this dispute with N started, you can probably imagine it wasn't as simple as just hiring someone to come out and measure. And wouldn't you know it? Before we even managed to book a surveyor, N somehow found one and had them come out. We suspect she may have bribed or pressured them because, surprise, the property lines they drew matched N's version exactly. Well, except for one section. She must have left that part out. Turns out, our property actually goes right up to about a foot from her house. That little fact? We had a lot of fun teasing her about that later. But even that tiny border issue wasn't nearly as bad as the big chunk of land she was still trying to claim as hers. Every time we tried to find a new surveyor, N would accidentally run into them, introduce herself casually, and drop subtle hints about an ongoing property dispute, just enough to scare them off without technically doing anything illegal. And let's not forget, the original landmarkers left by the bank's surveyor when we first bought the property? Those magically disappeared right before we moved in. Weird, right? Wonder how that happened. I guess we'll never know. Anyway, hiring a new surveyor has proven almost impossible. The ones we've found have given us outrageously high quotes, probably because they know they're risking their entire careers. But we're saving up and still determined to get it done. Which brings us to just a few months ago, the climax of this insane story. I know this has been a long ride, but trust me, it's all about to pay off. Because in the end, the very surveyor she hired ended up being the reason she had to pay over $200,000 in damages. And to be honest, we don't feel the slightest bit sorry for her. Now that we're all caught up, let's walk through what happened just a few months ago, the big climax. There was a terrible storm that hit our area, and it ended up knocking down a large tree located on the disputed portion of the property. The tree was right near the road, and when it fell, it did a lot of damage. It crushed a portion of our neighbor's property across the street, and worse, it completely totaled someone's brand new sports car while they were driving by. Thankfully, no one was injured, but the damage cleanup took several days. And just enough time passed for us to receive a shocking bill in the mail. Over $200,000 in damages. More than what our house and property were even worth post-renovation. Here's where the fun part begins. Malicious compliance. For those who don't know, in many areas, homeowners or property insurance won't cover damages caused to someone else's property. That liability usually falls on the landowner. Even if someone's on public land, like a street, if damage originates from your property, say a tree falls during a storm, and it could have reasonably been prevented, like trimming or cutting down dangerous trees near the road, then legally, you're on the hook. At least, that's how it works where we live. So, when we got the demand letter from some unknown rich person's insurance company about their totaled car, we calmly called and explained that the tree wasn't on our land. They asked some follow-up questions and said they'd investigate. About a week later, we received another letter with a copy of the deed and a property line printout. The fallen tree was circled in red, and it was clearly marked as being on our property. They were demanding full payment within 30 days of the original notice. At this point, we had about 2 weeks left to respond. We called again and politely reiterated that tree was not on our land. The agent we spoke to was less than convinced. While he didn't say it rudely, he basically implied that only a fool would believe the tree wasn't ours. The map showed it clearly. He doubted any property line could be that far off. We just gave him the number of the surveyor N had hired and told him to check it out for himself. He sighed, said he'd investigate further, but reminded us that we'd better be ready to pay up if we were wrong. Well, we never heard from them again. You remember the extreme consequences for giving false survey results in our state? Even if the surveyor had been bribed, there was no way the money was worth the risk he'd be taking by contradicting his own report. He'd probably have to flee the country if things went south. So of course, when the insurance company called, he gave them the exact same results he gave us, and we followed up with the insurance company ourselves a bit later, just to check on the situation. The agent we spoke to sounded a lot more relaxed. He couldn't share too much because of confidentiality laws, but he did confirm that N had disputed the claim, just like we had, and also stated the property wasn't hers. But the key was this: since we weren't contesting the survey results, and the surveyor was hired by N herself, the insurance company had no reason to believe the survey was incorrect. Legally, the responsibility for the damage fell squarely on N's shoulders. That was all we needed to hear. As for the aftermath, well, it doesn't seem like N had too much trouble paying the settlement. She wasn't happy about it, that's for sure, but she didn't have to sell off any land, so we assume she had the funds somewhere. Maybe savings, maybe a loan, who knows? Since then, we've stayed mostly quiet about the property line dispute. We're still thinking about saving up to hire a proper surveyor and finally reclaim the part of the land she's been squatting on. At this point, it's not even about the land anymore. It's about the principle. And N? Let's just say we can feel her eyes burning holes in the back of our heads every time she sees us outside. She definitely isn't happy that her own scheming blew up in her face. And every time she glares at us, we just smile and wave. We let her keep our land for free. I mean, who complains about free land? At this point, Anne could try to spread more rumors, but it would just blow up in her face. We've built solid friendships with a big chunk of the neighborhood, and after everyone found out that S had been stealing from them with N's full knowledge, trust in her completely evaporated. She's stuck. Between the lies, the shady business, the failed reputation, and the financial disasters, she's basically trapped in the mess she made. And we're just sitting back, watching the fire she started consume her little by little. Honestly, we can't wait to see what happens next. Oh, and here's a little bonus story for anyone still reading. While we were still thinking about putting up that privacy fence, we decided in the meantime to install an invisible dog fence. For those unfamiliar, it's a thin electrical wire you bury around the yard. The dogs wear a collar that gives a warning beep when they get too close, and if they ignore the beep, it gives them a very mild shock. We're not fans of shock collars, so before we even considered using it, one of us put it on and walked across the line ourselves. It was barely a tingle, more surprising than painful. The idea is that you train the dogs to respond to the beep, so they never even feel the shock. We wanted to give them the freedom to run around in the yard, especially since we couldn't afford a full privacy fence at the time. We made sure to place the invisible fence well within our own property, partly because it wasn't a huge yard, and partly because we didn't want the dogs getting anywhere near N's side. Well, apparently N saw the small flags we put down to mark the wire for training, and assumed that was where we planned to put our privacy fence. So, being her usual petty self, she decided to mow right over it. Big mistake. Turns out, electric lawnmowers and electrified boundary wires don't mix well. Her mower got completely fried. Every single electrical component was ruined. She ended up having to buy a brand new one, all because she couldn't resist trying to mess with us. The best part? The wire was buried more than 5 feet inside our property line. Her version of it, no less. So she had absolutely no grounds to blame us. And while she obviously tried to spin some rumors around it, not even she was dumb enough to outright accuse us. It would have made her look ridiculous. She didn't even ask us to replace the mower. I think she knew exactly how that would go. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed this saga. I've got another story brewing about how my mom's brilliant malicious compliance ended up costing her company over $100 million and got her entire department permanently shut down. But it's late, and I'm headed to bed. Catch you tomorrow. Be on the lookout for that one.